Luke 23:34 records Jesus' famous words from the cross as he was being crucified. It says, "And Jesus said, 'Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.'" For anyone familiar with the crucifixion story, and that would likely be billions of you, this is an incredibly powerful and moving moment that evokes a variety of emotions and thoughts within the hearts and minds of people everywhere. Indeed, an untold number of sermons and articles have been written about this topic. Among other things, this verse shows that even in the face of ignorance and wrongdoing, forgiveness and compassion are possible. Certainly, I encourage you to continue to seek out these other sermons, videos, and articles that further expound on this aspect and rightly dwell on the powerful example of the love and grace that Jesus embodied. I say this also because this video is more of a tiny footnote to all the great work that has already come before and will come after. Specifically, this video spends a tiny bit more time on this part of the verse that says, "For they know not what they do." Yes, in a verse that bleeds majestic forgiveness, we are apparently reminded about ignorance too. And it is this concept of ignorance that has been on my mind lately and what I want to spend a few minutes talking about. You know, I find it interesting that Jesus, when he said these words, did not say something like, "Father, forgive these people even though they are evil people." No, he was asking for forgiveness for his executioners and his enemies because of their ignorance. Barnes' Notes on the Bible, a work which was originally written in 1832 by Presbyterian minister Albert Barnes, talks a bit more about this ignorance. This is a fulfillment of the prophecy in Isaiah 53 verse 12. He made intercession for the transgressors. The prayer was offered for those who were guilty of putting him to death. It is not quite certain whether he referred to the Jews or to the Roman soldiers. Perhaps he referred to both. The Romans knew not what they did, as they were really ignorant that he was the Son of God, and as they were merely obeying the command of their rulers. The Jews knew, indeed, that he was innocent, and they had evidence, if they would have looked at it, that he was the Messiah. But they did not know what would be the effect of their guilt. They did not know what judgments and calamities they were bringing down upon their country. Again, as you can see, and according to Barnes' interpretation, Jesus' words clearly acknowledge the ignorance of those who crucified him. He recognized they were not fully aware of the gravity of their actions and the impact they were having on the world. By asking the Father to forgive them, Jesus demonstrates a willingness to look past their ignorance and extend grace to them. One cannot help but wonder about other references in the Bible about ignorance. Proverbs 1 verse 7, for example, states that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. In other words, ignorance comes from a rejection of knowledge and instruction. This rejection can lead to negative consequences, as we see in Hosea 4 verse 6, where God laments, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I reject you from being a priest to me. And since you have forgotten the law of your God, I also will forget your children." In contrast, pursuing knowledge and understanding can lead to blessings, as seen in Proverbs 2 verses 3 to 6, which states, "If you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, If you seek it like silver and search for it as for hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. Ignorance can also be a barrier to receiving God's love and blessings, as seen in Hosea 6 verse 6, which says, "For I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings." Ignorance then is not a virtue, but rather a state of darkness and deception. As the Apostle Paul writes in Ephesians 4 verses 18 through 19, "They are darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God, because of the ignorance that is in them, due to their hardness of heart. They have become callous and have given themselves up to sensuality, greedy to practice every kind of impurity." Now, outside of the Bible and more generally speaking, ignorance is a state of not knowing or misunderstanding something, and it can have a profound impact on our lives. Whether it's ignorance about ourselves or the world around us, ignorance can create suffering and prevent us from reaching our full potential. And yes, oftentimes such ignorance can lead to tremendous evil, like condemning someone like Jesus Christ to a horrifying death. I want to pause for a moment and acknowledge that Christianity is not the only system that talks about ignorance. Ignorance is addressed in one way or another in scientific and various belief systems around the globe. For example, within the observable universe at least, science offers a great way to overcome ignorance through research, experimentation, and critical thinking. Furthermore, various religions and belief systems, including Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, and Islam, address the idea of ignorance in their own way. Again, though, from Jesus' perspective on the cross, it is worth remembering that ignorance is a root cause of evil. Now, maybe it's not the only cause of evil, but it is certainly one of the causes of evil. When people are ignorant about something, they may act in ways that are harmful either intentionally or unintentionally. For example, someone who is ignorant about the effects of their actions on the environment may engage in practices that lead to pollution or destruction of natural habitats. Similarly, someone who is ignorant about the effects of their words or actions on others may engage in harmful behavior such as discrimination, prejudice, or violence. Likewise, someone who steals from another may be unaware of the terrible consequences to the person they are stealing from, and so on and so forth. Ignorance can also lead to the propagation of false beliefs and misinformation, which can be used to justify evil actions. For instance, ignorance about different cultures, religions, or ethnicities can lead to stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination, which can lead to violence and oppression. Similarly, ignorance about science, history, or politics can lead to the propagation of conspiracy theories, which can be used to justify harmful actions such as violence or the rejection of established scientific facts. Consider politics, for example. If someone only consumes information from biased sources that confirm their pre-existing beliefs, they may be missing key information that could broaden their perspective and lead to more informed decision-making. Likewise, if someone reflexively labels anyone who disagrees with them as a fascist or a racist, they may miss the opportunity to engage in productive dialogue with individuals who may share some of their concerns, but who may have different ideas about how to address them. Frankly, ignorance can lead to evil in many other areas. Here are just a few examples. Ignorance of cultural differences and dehumanizations of a particular group could lead to genocide. Ignorance of the history, and experiences of marginalized groups could lead to racism. Ignorance of the experiences and contributions of women could lead to sexism. In short, and in general, ignorance, as you might be able to see, could lead to a lack of understanding and empathy, which could potentially lead to actions that harm others. So, if ignorance is such a problem, what can one do? Well, again, generally speaking, it is possible to overcome ignorance through education, critical thinking, and empathy. For many, the impact of education and critical thinking, standard features of schools and universities in overcoming ignorance, should be obvious. Education provides individuals with a broader understanding of the world and the issues that people face. Critical thinking helps individuals analyze and evaluate information in order to form reasoned conclusions. And empathy allows individuals to connect with and understand the experiences and perspectives of others, which can help inform their decision-making process. Interestingly, it could be argued that Jesus hinted at all these three things, that is, education, critical thinking, and empathy, when he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Education and critical thinking, or lack of it, are hinted at when he mentioned lack of knowledge and not being able to analyze the impact of their actions, even if they had any knowledge. Furthermore, Jesus, despite dying on the cross, still managed to empathize with the pitiful condition of the people crucifying him when he asked for their sins to be forgiven. In any case, we know that societies around the world put great value in education and critical thinking, and so I will not spend much more time on it here. However, empathy, unfortunately, is not something that the world likes to dwell much upon. I mean, look at how human beings treat fellow human beings, for instance. It's quite terrible. Clearly, in my humble opinion, we don't give empathy the attention it truly needs. And that is sad, because empathy, which is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others, can be a powerful tool in overcoming ignorance. By putting oneself in another's shoes, individuals can gain a better understanding of different perspectives and experiences. Empathy is an idea that has often been explored by many philosophers and psychologists throughout time, including Adam Smith, who wrote in his 1759 book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, that empathy was essential to moral behavior. Let's think about this a little more. Many of you have had at least some level of education, whether it's a middle school education or a high school education. And many of you may have also had a college education. Would you say that the education and critical thinking that you gained through your alma maters and your job or jobs helped you bridge your gap with groups of people who disagree with you, whatever their differences may be they political, ideological, gender-based, cultural, ethnic, or anything else? Have they made you dislike the so-called other group, insert your other group here, any less? If education and critical thinking have not helped you, could it be that you might be missing empathy? In other words, if your heart doesn't share what your head thinks, what is the point? The irony is that it doesn't matter if you have a PhD, and it doesn't matter if you have never, ever been to school. Empathy is something that nearly everyone and anyone has access to, or at least should. Do you have a problem with a person? Try to put yourself in the shoes that the other person may have walked in, wherever those shoes may have walked, and whatever those differences and experiences may be. So, while ignorance can be one of the causes of evil, empathy, compassion, really, just forms of love, if you will, is an essential part of the solution. While Jesus identified ignorance as one of the causes of evil that was being perpetrated against him on Good Friday, he, being already knowledgeable of the great variations of education and critical thinking among his onlookers, also identified a way to bridge that gap when he said, "Father, forgive them." After all, forgiveness and empathy are related in that they both involve understanding and acknowledging the experiences and emotions of another person. Although, in my opinion, forgiveness takes empathy to the next level because forgiveness involves letting go of negative feelings and resentment toward others who have wronged us. Now, as a side note, I don't want to get too deeply into the idea and topic of forgiveness here, because that is deserving of an entire separate series unto itself. In terms of the topic of ignorance, I also don't believe forgiveness is essential to understanding somebody else. And I feel, especially in dysfunctional relationships, the idea of forgiveness is often misused, often by the offender, to allow repeated abuse of an individual. There are wonderful Christian counselors and authors out there, such as Dr. Henry Cloud, that have written extensively on topics such as this. And I encourage you to read their works. Nonetheless, it is worth noting the empathy that Jesus had with his oppressors in terms of appreciating their level of ignorance and forgiving them, despite that ignorance. One doesn't have to fully understand, and in fact, one may never fully understand someone else's point of view in this lifetime. But empathy will be a huge part of the solution in terms of ignorance, at least in terms of not doing evil and pursuing good. And so, while there are many ways to address the problem of evil arising from ignorance in the human race, including education and critical thinking, the simplest and sometimes most effective answer to the problem of ignorance is empathy. Something that is based on, yes, that old cliched idea called love. And with that thought, I shall close with the very verse that inspired this video. And Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do."